Our first stop on the pond tour will be in Japan. This footage is provided courtesy of one of the readers of Pondkeeper magazine, Mr. Dave Castle. Dave is a college professor based in Osaka, Japan. In this piece, Dave provides us with a valuable study of the traditional types of Japanese water gardens. Many pond purists study the aesthetically pleasing fundamentals of Japanese ponds. There's a lot we can learn from the ancient Japanese pond influences that can be incorporated into the most basic ponds. Now let's move eastward on our pond tour to the former Schwab Estate, located in Loretto, Pennsylvania. Mount Assisi Monastery was formerly the summer home of Charles M. Schwab, the so-called Bethlehem steel magnate. During the time of his ownership, the estate was known as Immergrün, which is a German word meaning always green. The construction of Mr. Schwab's grandiose estate and formal pond was completed in the year 1919. At the time, Mr. Schwab employed over 70 full-time people just to maintain the estate. Due to the stock market crash in 1929, however, Mr. Schwab lost nearly all of his fortune, including Immergrün. In 1942, the Franciscan Friars of the Third Order purchased the estate. Many changes have been made on the grounds of the former Schwab estate, and with the addition of the Fatima Shrine in 1950, prayerful visitors have been welcomed to the garden between the hours of dawn and dusk. This is an excellent example of a formal-style waterfall and pond that reminds us of a bygone era. Now let's move on to what may be considered America's premier public display garden. Longwood Gardens, located in southeastern Pennsylvania, was designed and built by Pierre S. DuPont. After his death in 1954, he left the gardens for the sole use of the public for purposes of exhibition, instruction, education, and enjoyment. Now, here for your enjoyment is more of Longwood Gardens. For our next stop on the tour, we're going to visit Lily Ponds. In business for over 78 years, it's the elder statesman of the water gardening industry.
Charles Thomas, who grew up here and worked here, his passion was always the aquatic plants. And when he had a chance to take over the business in the early 70s, he officially changed the name to Lily Ponds from Three Springs Fisheries and changed the emphasis of the business to water gardening, still inclusive of fish, but really sort of highlighting the plants, especially the water lilies. This is a pond that we installed here, and it was installed on film From a Country Garden. And this is a pond that's installed with a liner, and this is an EPDM liner, I believe, and it has a mixture of water lilies and bog plants, most of which are in bloom now. The water's still quite dark, and frankly that's a bit strange. Here it is, it's just about the end of June, and what's happened to us is we've got days like we have today where it's quite overcast, and really what we need is some more sunlight, which sounds contradictory. Sunlight, of course, is a source for algae, but we need to get the underwater plants and such really up to speed where they're going to eat the nitrates out of the water and push that algae down. This is a sort of edging that you don't see too much. This was done by Richard Kugel. And what you actually do is bring the liner up. Now normally the liner is pretty much flat under the coping, but in this case it's brought up to a point and it's put back down into the ground at a 45-degree angle. So it comes up and then it's put back down, and then you roll the sod back up to the edge. And I think it makes quite an interesting sort of edging. Either very neat, sort of like a golf course, or some folks feel that it adds a very naturalistic edge to the pond as opposed to a more formalized wall or such. We have a container garden right out here, and right behind this display garden we have an 1.5 acre pond that we built. So we literally go from about 3 square feet up to 1.5 acres just in this display garden. Most folks tell us that they really like a waterfall that has a bit more gusto to it, I guess, and also one that makes a bit more sound. Everything we've seen up to this point has been an informal, meaning it's not a strict geometric design, but in some areas having a perfect circle or a rectangle or a square fits in with the surrounding of the yard better. So that's what we have out here. We have different displays of different types of fountains and such. We've actually got a crew out here doing some weekly maintenance. All of these formal gardens, they do have a rock outside which was professionally done, but all of these are liner ponds. All of these are EPDM ponds, and excuse me, I think there are some tetraliners out here too. Also, something that the liners lend themselves to is this sort of coping, nice wide top so that you can set a drink or a meal or yourself right down on it. These are the lotus, and of course they have the leaf feature known as never wet. If you splash water up on them, it beads up like mercury and normally runs off. Sort of a small water garden in and of itself. This is a lotus pod, and what each of these little spots are is the very tip, the peduncle, of the lotus seed. And what this pod is going to do is going to continue to dry and expand, and eventually the seeds just fall out. The lotus really have, in this part of the country, about a strong 6-week period of blooming. And the pod is the center of each blossom. Regular bees and various beetles and such, and yes, they will certainly help pollinate the plants, certainly drawn by the heady fragrance that these lotus exude. I've seen lotus growing with stalks easily 5 or 6 feet tall.